Howdy, howdy. Sea Devil here. Welcome to my fourth episode of The Value of Chevrons. Now, I had meant to update this a lot earlier. As soon as the Grimgrave DLC came out, they changed the cost of chevrons, and I definitely wanted to get into this. I did a little preliminary testing and looking at it, but I finally dug into the numbers a little bit more, and it appears that, well, I'll summarize at the end, but this may be one of the larger changes to multiplayer balance, because this change is going to make a very significant difference by putting a lot of power into the hands of players to balance their armies how they want to balance them. It's going to leave a ton of room for innovation, for deep strategy, and it's going to be very fertile grounds for testing where we're going to make some important discoveries, particularly when it comes to key matchups between factions, and we'll go through that. First of all, I just want to update the basic data, the stuff that we went over on the first three episodes, and then I'll talk a little bit about why I think these changes are so massive. And I mean, I don't know if some of them were done on purpose or if it was just a very, well, whether it was an accident. If it's an accident, it's awesome. If it was done on purpose, it's brilliant. So we'll go take a look at that. Now, one of the first scenarios I looked at is ranking up a unit of miners versus a unit of dwarf warriors. Now, the dwarf warriors have been brought down in cost from 525 to 500, but the old value of that first chevron was 27 gold, and now it's down to 21. In the original analysis we did, we calculated the value of a chevron in this matchup to be 20 gold, so already you can see, I mean, it's almost right on the money. I can tell you right now, putting a chevron in here and there is never going to be a big mistake, and I don't think it's going to be a mistake at all. And there's also going to be some very, very good places to put your chevrons, and even to look at ranking units up past that 1 or 2 or 3, because fundamentally the change that's occurred with the cost of chevrons has changed putting a lot of chevrons into your units from a noob trap to a serious strategic consideration. Now, just to review the numbers I got in the original testing, I know this is a mess, but it's not a big deal, because it'll display exactly what's going on so that we can understand it. In the old testing, I looked at that crossover from the matchup between miners and dwarf warriors with great weapons, transitioning from usually losing to usually winning, and that single chevron being incredibly valuable because it's an inflection point going from losing to winning. And you can see just from the cost here, the old cost of miners with 8 chevrons was 645 gold, and now it's 527, much more reasonable. And 9 chevrons, 559. So still not a good overall value if you compare the miners to the dwarf warriors, in that the dwarf warriors are only worth 500. You're going to be losing some value out of that combat by doing that for your miners, but there's a lot more to this. So I'll just go down and look at the artillery really quick, and then we'll go back into the game and look at some other interesting finds. Now, one of the things we wanted to look at, which was some suggestions that were in the comments, was what is this going to do to artillery, or what is this going to do to ranged units who not only benefit by having their reload speed decreased, but also their accuracy. So the testing we did was to look at artillery, particularly long-range artillery, because that's where the accuracy will matter the most. And in our original testing, even at the old cost, where comparing 3 cannons with no chevrons to 2 cannons with 7 chevrons, about the same cost, we could actually do more damage on average with 2 cannons with 7 chevrons. So there was value there to begin with. And with 2 cannons with 9 chevrons, that even went up. The average damage went up, so that was even better. Now, with the reduced cost, a two cannons with 9 chevrons is the exact same cost as 3 cannons, yet it does a significantly increased amount of damage. So, what does that mean? And aside from the fact that, hey, I'm going to get more damage by using 2 cannons instead of 3, what it also brings to the strategy table is that 2 units are just more vulnerable than 3 units. You know, if you're playing the vampire counts and for some whatever reason you want to bring 3 units of artillery, and compare that to 2, if he brings 2 units of bats, he can tie up both of your high value units, whereas if you have 3 units in that situation, he can only tie up 2 out of the 3. So that's one of the things we talked about when we looked at the Cairn Wraiths versus the Great Swords and the addition of a zombie unit in there, so we have a 2v1 versus a 1v1 and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to go look at some of those old matchups, but here it's very clear. Artillery is definitely going to pull value out of adding chevrons, which I think is good. I mean, I'm going to make a video about balance issues as well, but right now ranged units and artillery, for good reason, aren't as good in competitive play as infantry and especially cavalry or flying units, and they shouldn't be. I mean, you don't want to have camp-offs in every battle. You want the battles to be dynamic and attacking, and there are some people that like to camp. I mean, me for one, I definitely like to set up the classic noob box and let my enemies come to me and play the dwarfs how I feel, or how I imagine the dwarfs would actually play or actually be in battle, but that's neither here nor there. So we're going to go look at some of the other matchups we talked about and a correction in some of the testing I did when I looked at it again, having not gone over it in a while. So one of the tests I did was to look at zombies, specifically because their upgrade chevrons are so cheap, and they've gotten even cheaper now. They're worth 14 gold. I think they were 15 before. And I grabbed 8 units of zombies and ranked them up twice, and then grabbed another army with 10 units of zombies to represent those 2 and ran them together, and it didn't seem to do very well. One of the issues with the zombies, and I would assume some other low value units, is if you watch down here, melee attack and melee defense, I use that first chevron, goes up 6 and 7, melee defense from 5 and 6. The second one, it doesn't go up at all. The leadership just goes up. So that was a mistake. I should have done the test with 1 chevron only and 1 extra unit. Now, I've redone the testing. I'm not going to put it up there, but I will tell you 8 units of zombies with 1 chevron each, which is going to basically cost 112 gold, will actually outperform 9 units of zombies with no chevrons, so you can gain some value there. Now, there's other factors to consider when you're looking at units this low, is that their melee attack and melee defense are so low, you're not going to pull that value out in every interaction, because say for example these guys are fighting Ironbreakers who have a melee defense of 68. They're going to hit for 10% against that Ironbreaker no matter if you add a chevron or you don't. It's going to be irrelevant, so it's not going to make any difference. It will add to your melee defense, but in some cases it's not going to add a whole lot. The other thing we looked at was the Cairn Wraiths versus the Great Swords. And if I pick up a unit of Cairn Wraiths here, they're worth 850. Now, a Cairn Wraith with no chevrons could not beat a unit of Great Swords with no chevrons. The Great Swords are worth 950 gold, and these are worth 850. So the Great Swords beat the Cairn Wraiths. Now that'll change a bit because their weapon strength or their bonus versus infantry has been reduced from 10 to 9, so that's going to make them a little weaker still. I don't know how much it's going to make a difference, but I think they're still the best infantry in the game by a mile. Anyways, if you look at this ranking up these Karen race, we know from our testing that at 3 ranks they will beat the greatswords. But the old value at 3 ranks was just over 1,000, so there are 50 more. Now with the reduction, at 3 ranks they're only 979. And what's very interesting is one thing we talked about is the inversion of that winning versus losing graph, which if you look at my very first video on combat analysis, it's a lot clearer what I mean by that if you haven't seen it. But we're basically going by spending this one bit of gold, from spending 44 gold, we're having a unit that costs less than the greatswords and loses to a unit that costs a little bit more and wins. So that's really significant, and there's going to be a lot of those combat interactions that come into play that are going to be areas where clever players are going to find good ways to spend their chevrons, especially these cheaper ones. And it doesn't scale up as fast, which is another very interesting thing. You know, we're 42, 43, 44, 46, 40. I'm guessing that's another one of these goofy things over here. 49, 50, etc. It really is quite interesting, and a place where we're going to be able to find some cool ways to take advantage of the chevrons. And it's, like I said, it's not going to be that massive noob trap anymore. One of the other things we looked at, for example, is Warriors of Chaos, and we compared a Chosen with great weapons versus a Chaos Warrior with great weapons. And before, when you ranked him up to 9, he cost more than the Chosen with great weapons. Now you see, you rank him up to 9, he's significantly less, 150. Now the Chaos Warriors are still going to lose that interaction, but they should lose, I mean, just intuitively. So these chevrons are a ton more intuitive, which is really going to help new players, because they're not going to be making big mistakes by adding chevrons, but it's going to make the competitive scene a ton more interesting, because you can take units that might not be competitive at the levels they're at and make them counter units for other factions that they normally wouldn't. So there's going to be a lot of interesting ways to take advantage of this effect. So I'm going to have to do a lot more testing. Obviously, there's going to be some really interesting areas to find value, and I will again say these types of things with him. I'm going to have to look at all archers and ranged and definitely all those types of things, and you know, that type of stuff. But the one effect I do want to point out again, if you haven't seen it, is if you're looking at, say, Chaos Warriors, which have come down, I think they were 800, now they're 775, versus Forsaken, and you're thinking about adding a chevron to either of these units. It does depend on who you're facing, but if you want to look, that chevron's going to increase your ability to do damage, or your ability to hit, and reduce the amount of damage you take from getting hit, so that unit can do damage longer. Now, the thing to look at is this weapon strength. When you're thinking about that, is in general, I know he doesn't have a lot of armor piercing damage, but in general, you can leverage that extra damage you can do, or that extra hit chance you get by adding a chevron, and to get your melee attack higher and your melee defense higher, allowing you to do more damage by looking at the weapon strength and saying, hey, this one has 58 weapon strength, this guy only has 36 weapon strength. I'm going to be able to spend that same amount, 39 for him, 38, very close, 1 gold difference, but with that extra gold, I'm going to actually have the potential of doing more damage. So anyways, I think this is gone through as something that, oh, cool, they changed chevrons, and you know, that's really good, and it's kind of gone under the radar. I think this is something that top tier players are going to start to pick up on, and you're going to start to see them using chevrons in competitive play in incredibly interesting ways, because they've come into the range where it might not be worth bringing a fodder unit worth 400 or 500 and trying to make your army better, but instead using that 400 gold to beef up some key units by maybe 1 chevron or 3 chevrons. And I'm sure there's going to be people that try to put 1 chevron in every unit because that's the most valuable chevron technically, right? Because it'll be the cheapest. And there's definitely going to be a lot to be had with artillery and range units. Now they've buffed range units, and I still don't think they're going to be that valuable to bring a bunch, and you don't want to. Again, fun play is attacking play, is damage. Camp offs are something I think you want to avoid. You want to always make that the losing choice to camp or to build your new box just for good gameplay and good competitive play. You want to really discourage camping without making it so punishing to be a camper that is not even fun to play. That's a fine line to ride, and I think that's why they're pretty careful about those changes. Anyways, I hope you found that interesting, and I look forward to hearing from anyone who finds some great ways to use those chevrons. And with that, I'll see you later.